Hi, everyone, and welcome to another literacy loving, book centered edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. I'm delighted on this episode to be talking with author Bethany W. Pope. Bethany, welcome to the program. Thanks for jumping on.
Thank you so much for having me. This is exciting.
Well, it's absolutely my pleasure. Absolutely my pleasure. I'm going to start out, as I often do, by mentioning a few titles. And if there are any that I miss, I'm just going to name like a top three
Of
for
course.
me.
Yeah.
And then if there are any I miss, please do shout them out. But Ordinary Lives being the first one that comes to mind, as well as Mask, Masque. And then finally, of the top three for me, The Rag in the Boneyard.
Oh, you liked that one.
I like that one. I like the
That's
retelling of
awesome.
Persephone.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah. So you're certainly welcome to shout out titles that I might have missed in that run through. But curious by means of a first question about what has drawn you to the world of the written word and authoring and things of that nature.
Well, I've been enamored with books my entire life. Um, my I think that every writer or most writers, hopefully not, because it's a little sad, but I think most writers begin their lives as lonely kids.
Hmm,
Um,
hmm.
lonely children who make their own worlds out of sheer a sheer need to survive. Um, but my mom, I have a very rocky relationship with my parents. But my mom actually saved my first book of poetry that I wrote when I was 6.
Hmm.
Um, and when I was rereading this, it was illustrated, and half the poems were about Jesus, because of course,
Hmm,
and
hmm.
half the poems were about beautiful women. And these are themes which have followed with me all my life. Um, but I do think, because I grew up in a place of pretty terrible uncertainty, honestly. My father was a minister in the Deep South,
Hmm.
and he had an undiagnosed brain injury, which made him volatile, shall we say. Um, but that volatility is balanced, I should say, by a very deep sensitivity and a love of poetry that was very real. Um, so my early childhood was a mixture of divine beauty and unspeakable brutality.
Hmm,
Um,
hmm, hmm.
and I think that that's certainly one way to make a writer. Um, as well as just growing up in the deep South, as I said. There were books, always books in my house, everything from Heinlein to Dante. Um, we had Piers Anthony sitting next to Ibsen in the library, and it was one of the few freedoms I had as a child was I could always read. The rule in my house was if you were reading, nobody could bother you.
Hmm.
So I would go up. We grew up in the third generation in the same house. It was incredibly William Faulkner. Um, and there was a secret passageway behind the staircase that you could access through a panel in the closet. I'm not
Oh,
making this up. And my brother and I used to sneak up there and just hide in the secret passageway, listening to like people going up and down the stairs, reading books until 3 in the morning with
wow.
honest to goodness candles. Yeah, it was that kind of childhood. And I think that if you grow up in that way, you don't have a choice. You're gonna
Mm-hmm.
be a writer. Oh, yeah. And
That is absolutely. I think the literary tradition was like steeped in you early on.
yes,
Wow.
yeah. And when I was an adolescent, I went and my parents lost custody of me for a while, and I was in an actual orphanage in South Carolina.
Hmm.
I was working on a farm, and I was sneaking books into the barn and just hiding out with the cows reading.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I resonate with that sense of like reading and creating as an escape and
Yes.
surviving with stories. I like that. Yeah.
Yes. Well, that's what Tolkien said, isn't it? Like, of course, fiction is escapist. That's its glory. That's
Hmm.
his quote about it, and it gives you a little pocket dimension to hide in.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and more importantly, it gives you a lens that you can look out of and see the world more clearly. If you meet something in a book, you're going to be less shocked when you encounter it in real life. Um,
Yeah.
hopefully.
True. True. True.
Sorry. I don't know
No.
if you can hear my son. He just woke up. My husband's gonna run in and
Oh no,
and
you're
play.
fine. That's fine.
Mm,
So you mentioned poetry there. Curious
yeah.
about what both prose and poetry afford for you in telling stories and exploring experiences and expressing what you want to express.
Oh, that's poetry. It was one of the things that called to me from earliest childhood. Whether it's the poetry of a hymn or literal verse.
Hmm.
Um, like I mentioned the Dante, we had the Gustave Doré illustrated Dante, and that was just enthralling. Um,
Hmm.
that's as true as you can get about human nature, but it's clothed in the language of myth.
Hmm.
Um, and that I think that mythic language is very useful and very appealing. It's a way of explaining yourself. And I think poetry is a little controversial statement here. I think poetry is almost always autobiographical.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
even if you're writing the Rag and Bone Yard, the myth of Persephone always resonated very strongly with me. That descent into hell and then the ascension, but you never fully escape.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that every poet is talking about the nature of reality and the nature of the world, even when they're not necessarily aware of it. So it's a way of seeing clearly. And I think fiction is kind of in many ways the opposite. It reveals truth, certainly. But it's more aspirational. Even when
Hmm.
you're writing deeply apocalyptic fiction, it's still hopeful
Hmm. Hmm.
because it has a contained ending.
Yeah.
It's its own little complete world that where everything fits together. And if the story works, even if the ending is bad, or not bad, but sad or disappointing or unsatisfactory, it's still a thing of, in a sense, perfection,
Hmm.
and that is in itself aspirational. So if you're reading a work of science fiction, if you're reading a work of Southern Gothic literature, if you're reading
Hmm.
realism, because it's all heightened, isn't it?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, it's inherently hopeful and it's inherently what you'd rather see.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned that language of myth, and
mm,
so that also connects with the question that I was going to ask you, which is your work draws upon and makes honest use of stories that have existed, like Persephone.
yeah, yes.
At the same time, you take that work in new directions, which I
Mm.
appreciate. I'm an English teacher, so I have that constant conversation in my mind and with my students of, the canonical versus the
Mm,
contemporary, which I
yeah,
don't think it's a real versus situation. I think there's a
no, no.
stream there. So
Mm.
curious about what inspires that move in your creating.
Carl Jung.
Ah, the collective. Oh, I see. Okay. Yes. Yeah, I like that.
I think um the idea of archetype and the collective unconsciousness, as well as the earliest stories from my childhood, like you'd think having a father who's a minister would be the Bible, but no, it was the Odyssey.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
is Beowulf. Um, and that sinks into you and it speaks to something that's already there is I think part of our evolutionary process. Um, because as you know, I'm teaching in China, I'm teaching English literature in China.
Mhm.
Um, and the overlap between mythic traditions, um, it's difficult to see the presence of myth as and the fact of myth as anything other than a side effect of our evolution, and the
Mhm.
development of our minds, the development of our consciousness. So I think that when you, I'm sorry, you can hear my baby.
Oh, it's fine.
Um,
It's fine.
when
Oh, we're
you,
talking about literary lineage, so it totally
yeah,
fits.
yeah. Oh, um, I think when you're talking about, um, when you're writing with mythology,
Hmm.
it's something that inherently connects with people,
Yeah.
something that people respond to instinctively, and without cheapening it, I think it's almost like a psychological shorthand for people.
Hmm.
And if
Hmm.
you can make it your own in some way, you can dig deeper into the nature of what we are, as a species.
Yeah, yeah, very, very well said. Very well said. So with that in mind, as folks are considering your work, any titles that I missed in that top three that you want to mention, but also what is it that you hope your audience sort of resonates with or takes away?
Well, my latest novel was The Hungry and the Lost, which
Hmm. Hmm.
is by Parthian. Um, and that's a sort of what we were talking about, the melding of the Southern Gothic and trickster mythology. So I worked a lot with the mythology connected with coyotes,
Hmm.
um, as well as environmental themes. Um, it's also set in around Tampa, um, an area I know very well. Um, Really, I hope people enjoy it.
Hmm.
Even when I'm writing about dark things, I hope that they find something in it that they can connect with and enjoy as something fun. Um, like it's an adventure. Every time you open a book, it's an adventure. Regardless of what the book is about, it's still a magic door.
Hmm.
And
Absolutely.
if I can make a magic door for people, I'll be happy.
I like that. I like that. Yeah. I think a lot about, the Sims Bishop thing of texts as um, windows and mirrors, but there's also sliding glass doors. So I really like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, a sliding glass door can also be a mirror if it's lighter on the inside than it is on the outside.
This is
So,
true. This
yeah.
is true. I like that. Um, so also curious as we're kind of making our way toward the last few questions here. You're welcome to throw in anything that we might have missed that you want to make sure to share. Um, Curious about next creative steps, and I also know that you are a comics reader from your bio.
Yes.
So curious about what you're reading in the world of comics, because many of the folks on the show are also comics creators.
Co Comics are our modern mythology, and I think
Hmm.
that you can't, it's like opera. They have these really big personalities that tell an emotional truth rather than a literal truth, and I
Hmm.
just I love them. Anything Tom Taylor writes, I could read every day.
Yeah,
He's a
yeah.
phenomenal human and a wonderful writer. Um, Al Ewing, and Kieran Gillen, are
Hmm.
doing really excellent work with the X-Men right now.
Hmm.
My favorite, my all-time favorite fictional character is Nightcrawler.
Love Nightcrawler. Yeah, yeah.
So much. Right now, unfortunately, he's in a book that isn't so great, but I will read literally anything in which he is involved. When I was way too young for it, I read a series called The Goon by Eric Powell.
Yes,
Are you
uh-huh. I
familiar with
remember
that?
that. Yeah, quite
Yeah.
dark. Yeah.
dark but so funny, and
Uh-huh.
like this mixture of the grotesque and the deeply tragic, and then psychotic little Frankie with his knife to the eye and random zombies. You can't go wrong.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He mixes up mythology with just absolutely gorgeous artwork. And Hellboy
Oh
is
yeah,
probably
yeah.
my favorite, and also The Nice House on the Lake. I don't
Yes.
know if you've read that. Yeah, it's
Uh-huh.
beautiful.
Uh,
Alvaro Martinez Bueno's art is just mwah.
yes. Uh-huh.
but
Uh-huh.
but in terms of what's next, I've been writing an awful lot of horror and apocalyptic fiction. And I'm not certain as to why. I guess I'm in a good mood, so delve into the darkness.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Um, and I just put together another collection of poetry, which I'm sending around to a couple of publishers. So we shall see. Uh,
Wonderful. Wonderful, wonderful. Glad that the creating is continuing. Now, you also have a website, is that right? That I should probably
um,
mention?
it's actually defunct at the moment. I forgot
Oh, okay.
to.
No
I
worries, no
work
worries.
I work for Comic Watch as well. The Comic Watch website for
Ah.
reviews and also analytical work. Um, I'm on the Parthian website, the Saren website. Um, it's better if you buy a book via them. Indigo Dreams for poetry,
Hmm.
as well. If you buy a book directly from the publisher, it helps me out a little bit, but Amazon's good too.
All right. All right. Good to know. Good to know. Yeah. Anything you're currently reviewing in the world of comics?
Ah, Immortal X-Men. I'm basically the go-to for Tom Taylor for our website. Um, X-Men Red. I pick up bits and pieces. I'm reviewing Uncanny Spider-Man, but I'm sorry.
No worries, no
And
worries.
um and the Marvel Zombies resurgence is fun because you can't I I don't know, there's a part of my brain that's dedicated to classical literature, a part of my brain that's dedicated to modern fiction, and a part of my brain that just goes crazy for zombies.
I
Um
understand. Yeah,
yeah, so yeah, that's about all. I also do some analytical work, as I said, for the site. So,
fantastic, fantastic. Well, I appreciate the range of what you do from poetry to fictional work to comics reviews. I'm going to have to read more of your reviews now. So thank you, Bethany, for jumping in. Did we miss anything that you want to make sure to mention?
I'll probably think of something like half an hour after we're done.
Hmm. Hmm.
But oh, Silage is probably my best reviewed poetry book, Silage from Indigo Dreams. Um, but that's about all, I think.
All right, all
Thank
right.
you
Well,
so much for having me. I just want to say this has been really good. Thank you.
yeah, my pleasure, my pleasure. Glad to talk with you and glad to talk again in the future sometime.
Yeah, I would love that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.